The first thing I learned about silence is that it doesn't protect you. It just makes the sound sharper when it finally breaks. I was staring at the reflection of my monitor when Richard cleared his throat. Not the polite kind, the theatrical one, the kind that announced itself before words ever arrived. The office quieted by instinct. Chairs stopped creaking. Keyboards went still. Even the hum of the air conditioner felt too loud, as if it might interrupt whatever performance he was about to give. "So," he said, dragging the word out while leaning against the edge of my desk cluster, arms crossed like he owned the furniture, the walls, the people inside them. "We've had a little feedback." My stomach tightened. Feedback never floated through this office unless it was about numbers or profits or someone else's failure. Richard smiled. He always smiled just before he struck. It was wide, indulgent, like he was sharing an inside joke with himself. "Apparently," he continued, glancing around the open plan space, "some people are uncomfortable." A pause, a calculated one. "With the way Emily smells." It landed exactly as he intended it to, right in the middle of me. Laughter popped from the far end of the room. Not genuine, never genuine. It was the bark of survival. A few people smiled reflexively, unsure whether not laughing would make them next. One woman near the printer looked at her screen with sudden fascination, as if Excel had just revealed the meaning of life. Richard laughed loudest. Hey, I'm just passing along what people say," he added, raising his hands in mock innocence. "No judgment. We're a team, right?" My ears burned. Heat crawled up my neck and settled behind my eyes, but I didn't blink. I'd learned early on that reacting only fed him. Silence, I thought. Maybe silence would starve him. It didn't. "I mean," Richard went on, sniffing exaggeratedly, "it's an office. Personal hygiene matters. Professionalism matters." He chuckled again, softer this time, more intimate. "Some of us sweat doing real work, I guess." More awkward smiles. No one met my eyes. I kept my hands folded in my lap under the desk, nails pressed into my skin hard enough to ground me. The smell he talked about didn't exist. Or if it did, it was no more than the scent of a long day, of stress, of being human. But facts had never mattered to Richard. What mattered was elevation, his, at the cost of someone else's spine. I waited for it to end. It always ended eventually. "You might want to be more aware," he said at last, tapping the side of my desk. "Just trying to help." Then he walked away, satisfied, applause unnecessary. Conversations restarted with forced volume. Someone coughed. Someone else made a joke about deodorant commercials. I breathed in slowly, then out. No apology came. None ever did. The open plan office made hiding impossible. Glass walls, low dividers, nowhere to retreat. I could feel my body existing too loudly, my breath, my pulse, my presence. I became hyper-aware of myself, of every inch of skin, every movement, as if I might offend the room simply by being there. This wasn't the first time. It was just the most public. Richard liked witnesses. Power tasted better when shared. Later, in the break room, I caught my reflection in the microwave door. Same face. Tired eyes, yes, but clean, controlled, alive. I leaned closer, breathed into my sleeve, onto my wrist. Nothing. Just fabric and soap. I smiled faintly. Not because it was funny, but because the absurdity steadied me. Because I understood something important. Humiliation only worked if you accepted its narrative. Back at my desk, an email pinged, a reminder about quarterly goals. Richard's name sat proudly in the sender field. Team excellence starts with accountability. I closed it without replying. Around me, the office buzzed on, indifferent. Screens glowed. Coffee machines hissed. No one spoke to me directly for the rest of the afternoon, but I caught glances. Quick, guilty, curious. I wondered how many of them believed him. I wondered how many were relieved it wasn't them. What Richard didn't know, what no one there knew, was that I had always been very good at paying attention, at listening when people thought no one would remember. I cataloged tones, words, moments. Not for revenge, not yet. Just for truth. That day, as I packed up my bag to leave, I noticed Richard watching me from his office. Through the glass, his smile returned, smug and certain. He believed something fundamental had been reinforced, that I was small, that he was untouchable. I met his gaze deliberately this time. I didn't smile, I didn't frown. I simply looked at him and remembered. Humiliation doesn't end when the laughter fades. It lingers. It clings to you like a smell only you can sense. After that day, Richard didn't need announcements anymore. He'd found something sharper. Repetition. Small cuts delivered with a smile. Death by 1,000 jokes. It started the next morning. I was logging into my computer when his voice floated over the divider. "Emily, quick question." I looked up. "Did you try a new detergent?" He sniffed the air again, theatrically. "Just checking. You know, brand consistency matters." A few quiet chuckles. Someone pretended to cough to hide a laugh. I nodded once and went back to my screen. My silence frustrated him only briefly. He learned to enjoy talking into it. By lunch it was, "You should be grateful you even work here." He said it casually, leaning in my doorway as if offering career advice. A lot of people would kill for this opportunity. I knew what he really meant. Without me, you're nothing. In meetings, he interrupted me mid-sentence. "Let the adults talk," he'd joke, waving his hand dismissively. "Emily will catch up eventually." When numbers were good, he took credit. When they weren't, he'd sigh and glance at me. Never directly. Public blame required finesse. "People like you are replaceable," he said one afternoon, stirring sugar into his coffee while standing far too close. Never forget that. I never forgot anything. Around us, the office adapted. Not to me, to him. People laughed quicker, avoided eye contact longer. My name stopped coming up in conversations unless absolutely necessary. Isolation makes cruelty cleaner. It keeps the blood off everyone else's hands. I started eating lunch at my desk. Every afternoon around 3, Richard did his rounds. He called it checking morale. I called it hunting. He lingered just long enough at each desk to mark territory, to remind everyone whose air they were breathing. With me, he lingered longest. "You know," he said one day, voice low, confidential, "I built all this myself. From nothing." He gestured vaguely at the office. "People respect that." I waited. "And you?" He shrugged. "You should focus on not messing it up." That night, at home, I stood under the shower longer than usual. Water hammered my skin until it turned red. Not because I believed him, but because exhaustion breeds doubt, and doubt is harder to wash off. Still, something inside me remained untouched. A quiet place. Richard didn't reach it because he didn't know where to look. I watched him carefully now. His patterns, his tells. How his confidence cracked when he thought no one important was watching. How he needed an audience, always. He never insulted me when clients were around, never when upper management visited. His cruelty was private enough to deny, public enough to bruise. Smart, cowardly, effective. On Friday, as everyone packed up, he called out one last time. "Emily." I froze. He smiled that familiar smile. "Have a good weekend. Maybe relax a little." Another sniff, another laugh. This time, no one laughed with him. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but I saw it. A few people looked uncomfortable. A few looked away too quickly. cracks. Very small ones. Richard didn't notice. He never looked down. Or around. Only ahead, convinced the world was a straight line paved by his own footsteps. As I stepped into the elevator, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. I looked tired, but I didn't look broken. He was right about one thing. Being underestimated is dangerous. Just not for the reason he thought. The email came in just before noon, flagged urgent, stamped with importance like a royal seal. Client strategy meeting. In person. Mandatory. I opened the attachment and felt something cold settle in my chest. The city was 300 miles away. A regional hub. Flights filled days in advance. Trains even worse. Everyone knew that. Apparently Richard did too, because within minutes, he was standing at my desk. All booked, he announced loudly, as if delivering bad news to the stock market. Planes, trains, nothing left. A few heads turned. I stayed seated. Richard leaned one elbow on the divider, casual, generous. Guess we're improvising. I looked up. Improvising how? His smile came slowly like he savored the moment. We'll drive. The words hung there longer than necessary. Together, he added after a beat. You and me. Someone across the room let out a surprised laugh. Someone else muttered, "That's dedication." Richard straightened, clearly enjoying the reaction. Clients too important to miss. Sacrifices have to be made. He glanced down at me. Some of us understand that. I said nothing. He tapped his phone against my desk. I'll pick you up at 6 tomorrow morning. Don't be late. It wasn't a question. It never was. After he walked away, the office noise swelled again, but this time it felt different. Closer. Heavier. I could feel the unspoken thoughts vibrating in the air. Poor Emily. Why her? Thank God it's not me. I packed my bag that evening with deliberate calm. Notebook, charger, power bank, water bottle. Old habits surfaced without being invited. I didn't question them. At home, I checked the route out of curiosity. Long stretches of highway, sparse towns, thick forest toward the end. I remembered camping trips from years ago, the smell of wet pine, the way darkness swallowed roads when the sun dipped too fast. I slept poorly. At 6 sharp, Richard's black SUV pulled up outside my apartment. He leaned across the passenger seat to open the door, all performative chivalry. Morning, he said brightly. Ready for an adventure? The word made my skin crawl. His car was spotless. Leather seats. Faint scent of artificial pine. He had the news playing loudly as if silence offended him as much as weakness. We merged onto the highway, the city falling away behind us. 10 minutes passed in peace. An anomaly. You know, he said finally, eyes fixed on the road. Most people would kill for this kind of access. I didn't answer. Traveling with the boss. One-on-one mentorship. He chuckled. Could change your career. Still nothing. He sighed dramatically. Such a shame you don't appreciate things. Miles rolled by. He talked. I listened. About his beginnings, his grit, his brilliance. About people who owed him everything and gave him nothing. I became a convenient absence, someone who absorbed his words without reflecting them back. At a gas station, he didn't ask if I needed anything. He bought coffee only for himself. Careful, he said when we got back in the car. Smells might linger. I stared out the window. The sky darkened unexpectedly around noon. Clouds gathered low and fast, bruised purple and gray. Wind tugged at the trees lining the road. Richard noticed and smirked. Weather apps are always wrong. We'll be fine. Rain started as a whisper, then a rhythm. The road narrowed as we left the highway. GPS recalculated. Recalculated again. This thing's useless, he muttered, tapping the screen harder than necessary. I watched the fuel gauge dip closer to empty. You should have reminded me to stop earlier, he snapped suddenly. I turned to him slowly. You didn't ask? He scoffed. Always an excuse. Thunder cracked overhead, sharp enough to vibrate in my chest. Mud splashed up onto the sides of the car. Trees pressed in tighter now, branches arching like ribs. For the first time since we left, Richard grew quiet. Not confident quiet. Not arrogant quiet. Uncertain quiet. The road ahead dissolved into brown slush, water pooling where asphalt should have been. The car lurched, wheels spinning uselessly. Damn it, he snapped, gripping the steering wheel. The engine sputtered once, twice, then stopped. Rain hammered the roof as silence rushed in to take its place. Richard stared through the windshield, breathing shallowly. I sat very still, hands folded in my lap, listening, not to the storm, but to the sound of control finally slipping out of his grasp. At first, Richard laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because laughter had always worked. It had always bent rooms back into shape, convinced people the situation was harmless, manageable, his. He leaned back in his seat, rain drumming harder against the roof, and shook his head as if the stalled engine were a personal insult. Well, he said, forcing a grin, looks like we'll be taking a little break. I didn't respond. The forest pressed in on all sides, tall trees, too close together, their branches tangling overhead like knotted fingers. The road behind us had already begun dissolving into mud, rain carving shallow rivers where tires had passed minutes ago. The GPS screen glowed uselessly, spinning, recalculating nothing. Richard tried the ignition again. Click. Nothing. Again. Louder. Angrier. The dashboard flickered, then went dark. Unbelievable, he muttered. He smacked the steering wheel. This car was serviced last week. I watched him out of the corner of my eye. The confidence was still there, barely, but it had thinned, like paint over a crack. He turned to me suddenly. You know, this wouldn't be so bad if you didn't bring your situation into such a confined space. I met his eyes. My what? He waved vaguely toward me. You know. There it was again. The joke. The blade dipped in humor. We're stuck, he continued, leaning closer, voice almost conversational. For all we know, for hours. This smell issue? It's just inconsiderate. I inhaled slowly, counted. Open a window. Rain lashed the glass, as if answering for him. He scoffed. Great solution. Then, with a smirk, guess deodorant wasn't in your emergency kit. I let the words pass through me. He needed them more than I did. I could see it now. How he filled uncertainty with cruelty, how mockery patched the holes fear tore open. Outside, the storm intensified. Wind rocked the car gently at first, then harder. The trees groaned, long wooden complaints twisting high above us. Water crept closer to the tires, turning dirt into sludge. Richard checked his phone. 1 bar. Then none. No signal, he snapped. Fantastic. He leaned back again, crossed his arms, dragged his fingers through his hair. Relax, he said, more to himself than me. Someone will pass by. I glanced at the road. No tracks, no lights, just forest swallowing sound and distance whole. Minutes passed, then more. Richard talked to fill them. About incompetence, about infrastructure, about how absurd it was that someone like him could be inconvenienced by weather and bad roads. He found new angles for old insults. My posture, my silence, the way I didn't jump to reassure him. A little gratitude wouldn't kill you, he said at one point. I brought you along, didn't I? I turned my head slowly. You told me to come? He smiled thinly. Careful. Another crack of thunder split the air, closer now. The car shuddered. For the first time, he didn't laugh. Rain streaked down the windshield in blinding sheets. The world beyond the glass blurred into gray motion. The car felt smaller with every second, the cabin heavy with damp air and unspoken tension. Richard shifted in his seat, restless. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "I don't belong here." That was the truest thing he'd said all day, not in the way he meant it, but closer. He rolled his shoulders, sat up straighter and tried the engine again, even though we both knew it was pointless. When it failed, he exhaled sharply and rubbed his face. "You're awfully calm," he said suddenly. Suspicion edged his voice. "Most people would be panicking." "I assess first," I replied simply. He snorted. "Of course you do." But I saw it then. The flicker. The brief, unwanted glance he cast at the darkening forest, at the rain that showed no sign of mercy. Mockery no longer flowed as easily. The jokes came slower now, like muscle memory failing under pressure. Another hour passed. The temperature dropped. Damp cold crept into the car, seeping through metal and leather alike. Richard wrapped his arms around himself. "This storm's getting worse," he said, quieter. I nodded. Yes. He didn't comment on my smell after that. Silence settled between us at last. Not the safe kind, not the obedient one he preferred in the office, but a thick, watchful silence. The kind that forces reality to take up space, the kind that waits. And for the first time since I'd known him, Richard had nowhere to perform, no audience to impress, no hierarchy to climb. Just him. Just me. And a car that had become a cage. The sound came first. Not thunder, but something deeper. A low, uneven roar that didn't tear the sky so much as crawl through it. I leaned forward slightly, listening. Richard noticed. "What is that?" "Rain," I said. "Too much of it." As if on cue, the forest answered. Water poured down in vertical sheets now, not falling so much as pressing on everything beneath it. The muddy road beside us loosened, its surface rippling, sliding in slow, deliberate movements. The ground wasn't holding anymore. It was giving up. Richard stared out the window. "This is insane." The car lurched suddenly, just a shift, barely noticeable but enough. The tires sank another inch, mud sucking at them greedily, as if the earth had grown a mouth. "Did you feel that?" he asked sharply. "Yes." He laughed. "Too loud, too fast. Relax. Cars don't just sink." Another tremor followed. Slower. He didn't laugh this time. The storm intensified until individual sounds disappeared. No distinct drops. No separate gusts of wind. Just one continuous, overwhelming noise. The forest blurred into dark vertical streaks. Branches whipped and bent, leaves tearing free and slapping against the car like desperate hands. Richard pulled at the door handle. It opened with effort. Rain blasted inside instantly, soaking the seat, his sleeve, his shoe. He swore and slammed it shut. "Unbelievable," he muttered, trembling now, not from cold alone. The dashboard clock flickered and died. The last artificial light went with it, leaving us in gray, half-dark. "We should wait," he said, trying to sound authoritative. "Storm will pass." I looked at the water creeping closer to the doors. "The ground is turning to slurry. Waiting makes it worse." He clenched his jaw. "You don't know that." "I do." He whipped his head toward me. "And suddenly, you're an expert?" Another deep sound rolled through the forest. Not thunder. Movement. Somewhere ahead, part of the road collapsed inward, earth giving way with a wet, sucking groan. Richard froze. "That wasn't thunder," he whispered. "No," I agreed. Panic arrived quietly, not screaming yet. Just tight breaths. Shaking fingers. The realization that the world didn't care who he was, or how loudly he spoke in meetings. "This can't be happening," he said. "People like me don't just..." Get stranded. I watched water seep into the footwell. Cold pooled around my shoes. We need to think, I said calmly. He ignored me, fumbling for his phone again. Still no signal. He shook it, as if intimidation might work on reality too. Someone will notice we're late. The wind howled harder, bending trees impossibly far. One cracked somewhere to our left, the sound sharp and violent. No one knows where we are, I said. That broke something. Richard's breathing turned erratic. Stop saying that. You told no one we were driving, I continued, and the GPS stopped hours ago. He slammed his fist against the door. Stop. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The rain flooded the silence instead. Water reached my ankles now. The car smelled like wet earth and metal, not sweat, not shame. Just nature doing what it does best, erasing illusions. Richard cried. This is ridiculous. I run a department. I negotiate million-dollar contracts. And right now, I said gently, you're a man in a stalled car in a storm. He slumped back, staring at the ceiling. We're going to die out here, aren't we? The words were small, bare, nothing like the jokes. I didn't answer immediately, not because I was afraid, but because answers matter when people are listening for them. Outside, the road was gone now. Not damaged. Gone. Mud and water where solid ground had been. Forest everywhere else. The storm showed no sign of stopping. Richard covered his face with his hands. His shoulders shook. This isn't how it's supposed to end. I felt something then. Not pity exactly, but clarity. The man who turned offices into stages had no script for this. No jokes sharp enough to cut through fear. No hierarchy to stand on when the earth itself was unstable. We're not staying in the car, I said finally. He looked at me, eyes wide, red-rimmed. You want to go out there? Yes. He laughed weakly. You're insane. Another tree cracked closer. Something heavy hit the roof and slid off. Richard flinched violently. Please, he said suddenly. Let's just wait, please. The word hung between us, unfamiliar on his tongue. I reached for my bag, checked its contents with steady hands. Outside, the storm raged on, indifferent. This was no longer about humiliation or power, or offices with bright lights and thin walls. This was survival now. And for the first time since I'd met him, Richard knew it, even if he wasn't ready to admit who was going to lead. Panic doesn't arrive like people think. It doesn't scream right away. First it hesitates. Richard sat frozen, hands gripping his knees, eyes darting between the windows as if the forest might suddenly announce its intentions. His breathing was shallow, fast, too fast. The confident rhythm he carried through meetings, negotiations, humiliations, was gone, replaced by something thin and fragile. This is temporary, he said, more insistently than convincingly. Storms pass, roads reopen. Someone will find us. I zipped my jacket higher. The cold had settled deep now, the kind that sinks past skin and into joints. The temperature is dropping, I said. Hypothermia is a bigger risk than the rain. He didn't acknowledge the words. He rocked slightly in his seat instead. Another gust shook the car hard enough that the doors rattled. That shouldn't happen, he whispered. Cars don't shake like this. They do when trees fall near them. The next sound erased any doubt, a heavy crack followed by a low crash somewhere close. Richard jumped so violently his head hit the window. No, he said, shaking his head. No, no, no. His phone slipped from his hand into the water pooled at his feet. He stared at it as if it had betrayed him personally. That was my backup, he croaked. My contacts. My numbers. I said nothing. Logic has no traction when fear revs too fast. He dragged his hands down his face, smearing rainwater and sweat together. The irony didn't register with him. He no longer cared about appearances. He only cared about ending this. We should have flown, he snapped suddenly, turning on me. I told you this was a bad idea. You decided, I replied evenly. His voice rose. You should have warned me. I did. Then you should have insisted. The storm swallowed his words, tearing them away before they could land. Richard's chest heaved. His lips trembled. I can't. He swallowed hard. There's no one coming, is there? There it was. The truth, stripped of polish. No one knows where we are, I answered honestly. It shattered him completely. He slid down in his seat until his back hit the door, knees drawn slightly inward, arms wrapped around himself like a child trying to disappear. His breath hitched, sharp and uneven. We're going to die out here, he whispered. This is how people die. In documentaries. The man who once reminded me daily that I was replaceable was now convinced the world had already replaced him. I shifted, keeping my voice calm. Panic wastes energy. We can't afford that. He laughed hysterically. Still giving orders? His eyes filled with tears. You don't understand. I can't do this. I'm not built for this. I am, I said. That made him look at me. Really look at me. His eyes were red, unfocused, searching for something solid. His gaze caught on my stillness, on the way my hands didn't shake, the way my breathing stayed slow and measured. What do you mean? He asked. I grew up in scouting programs, I said. Wilderness survival, navigation, weather behavior. He stared. You're lying. Another tree fell, this one unmistakably closer. The ground vibrated. I'm not, I said. Something in him cracked wide open then. His mouth opened, closed. His pride scrambled for footing and found nothing. His voice broke completely. I don't know what to do. Silence followed. Not because the storm stopped, but because he did. Then, in a voice so small it barely existed, he said, Help me. The word carried more weight than all his insults combined. I studied him for a moment. This wasn't triumph. This was reality reshuffling the hierarchy without asking permission. We can't stay here, I said. The car will flood. A falling tree could crush it. He shook his head rapidly. I can't go out there. I can't. Please. Fear is normal, I replied. Letting it decide is what kills you. His shoulders shook harder now. Tears spilled freely, unashamed, unstoppable. I don't want to die here. I don't want to die alone. I opened my bag, pulled out a flashlight and spare socks. The light cut a thin, defiant beam through the gloom. You're not alone, I said. But you have to listen. He nodded desperately. I will. I swear. I met his eyes. Really met them. For once, I added. Not as my boss. He swallowed. Okay. Outside, the storm howled like a living thing, impatient and cruel. Inside the sinking car, something else had died quietly, the illusion that power followed titles, that confidence equaled competence. Richard was shaking violently now, teeth chattering. Without looking up, he whispered, I'm sorry. I didn't answer that either. Some apologies are only useful later. Right now, all that mattered was this. The man who ruled an office with laughter and fear was gone. In his place sat someone fragile, terrified, and waiting for direction. I made him get out of the car. Not gently, not patiently. Urgency doesn't negotiate. Stand up, I said, already pulling my hood tight. Rain hammered down my back instantly, icy and heavy. The ground sucked at my boots. Richard didn't move. I can't, he said, hugging himself. I'll fall. I'll break something. You'll drown if you stay, I replied. Now. Another crack echoed through the forest, wood tearing like fabric. That decided it. He stumbled out of the car, slipping immediately, hands flailing until he caught the doorframe. Help me, he cried. I grabbed his arm, steadied him, then let go once his balance returned. His eyes darted wildly, panic spiraling again the moment my hand left him. The car was already at a tilt now, one side sinking deeper as water pooled around it. We didn't have much time. Listen carefully, I said, raising my voice over the storm. We need shelter first. Something elevated. Trees break the wind. I don't know where to go, he shouted. I do, I answered. That stopped him. He stared at me, rain plastering his hair to his forehead, arrogance completely washed away. You really know what you're doing? He asked, desperate. I didn't reassure him softly. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I'm the only reason you're still alive, I said calmly. So you're going to do exactly what I say. The rain poured down his face like tears. He nodded. Fast. Hard. We moved into the trees, away from the road, or what had been a road. The forest floor was uneven, slick with mud and roots. Richard slipped constantly, gasping every time he nearly fell. This is insane, he sobbed. This is insane. Save your breath, I said. You'll need it. After several minutes, I found what I was looking for. A small rise, slightly higher ground, with thick evergreens packed close together. Natural windbreak. Not perfect, but better than nothing. We'll shelter here, I said. With what? He cried. We don't have anything. I opened my bag and pulled out a folded emergency tarp. His eyes widened. You carry that with you? Yes? You're paranoid, he said weakly. I'm prepared. We worked quickly. I showed him how to anchor the tarp between two trees, how to angle it so rain would run off instead of pooling. His hands were clumsy, numb with cold and fear. Focus, I snapped when he dropped the rope for the third time. If you panic, you die. He froze. Then, very quietly, he said, I'm trying. We finished just as another wave of rain slammed down harder than before. The space beneath the tarp was cramped and dark, but dry enough. I checked his hands. White, shaking. You're already cold, I said. Hypothermia's next if you don't move. I can't stop shaking, he whispered. I looked at him, really looked at him, this man who had called me replaceable, who had reduced me to a joke for months. Then I spoke. With all due respect, I said, my voice even. Won't my smell bother you? The words landed harder than any slap. Richard stared at me, mouth open. Shame flooded his face instantly, cutting through the panic like a blade. He swallowed hard. No, he said hoarsely. No. I'm sorry. I didn't. Please. Silence pressed in around us, broken only by rain and his uneven breathing. I need you, he added. I can't do this without you. There it was. Not power, not authority. Truth. I handed him dry socks. Change these. Keep moving your feet. Slowly. He obeyed instantly. As he struggled, he looked up at me. I was wrong about you. I didn't respond. We sat close under the tarp, forced by necessity, sharing body heat. The forest shook and groaned around us, but we were stable. For now. Richard's teeth chattered uncontrollably. If we get out of this, he said, voice barely audible, I promise. Don't, I interrupted. Right now, promises don't matter. He nodded, eyes glassy. Okay. Minutes passed, then more. Gradually, his shaking slowed, his breathing steadied. He looked at me again, differently this time. Not above, not through. At. So what now? He asked. Now, I said, checking the rain, the trees, the direction of wind. We wait for the storm to weaken. Then we move. His face twisted with fear. And if it doesn't? Then we adapt. He hugged his knees closer. You're not leaving me, are you? I met his gaze. No, I said. But you don't get to lead anymore. He nodded without hesitation. Outside, the storm continued its assault, relentless and uncaring. But under the tarp, in the narrow space carved by knowledge and necessity, the balance had shifted completely. Richard survived because I allowed it. And he knew it. The storm didn't end. It thinned, like a predator stepping back just far enough to watch. Rain softened into an endless drizzle, cold and persistent, soaking the forest in silence broken only by dripping leaves and distant cracks from overstressed wood. Night crept in early under the heavy canopy. Darkness in a forest doesn't fall. It closes. Richard noticed first. "I can't see," he whispered, panic edging back into his voice. "Emily, I can't see." I turned on the flashlight. The narrow beam carved a trembling tunnel through the dark, catching wet bark, mud, the shine of his frightened eyes. "We move now," I said, "before it worsens again." He nodded immediately, scrambling to his feet too fast, almost falling. I caught his arm. He clutched back instinctively, fingers digging into my sleeve. "Don't leave me," he blurted. "I won't," I said, "but don't grab me like that." He released me instantly, hands hovering in the air like a child afraid of punishment. "Sorry, I'm sorry." We moved slowly through the trees. I chose direction by slope, by wind, by instinct sharpened long ago. Richard followed half a step behind me at all times, so close I could feel his breath hit my shoulder. "I can't do this alone," he kept saying, over and over. I said nothing. Words didn't move us forward. After 20 minutes, his legs started giving out. He stumbled, fell to his knees in the mud, sobbing openly now. "I can't anymore," he cried. "Please, I can't." I crouched in front of him, level with his face. "If you stay here, you die." "I know," he wailed, "but I'm scared." Something shifted inside me then. Not anger, not satisfaction. Detachment. I reached into my pocket and took out my phone. The battery indicator blinked low. Still enough. I unlocked it, opened the recorder. Not video. Audio. Less power. More truth. I pressed record. Richard didn't notice at first. "You said you were strong," he sobbed. "You said you were self-made." I lied. "I don't survive things. I avoid them. I scare people so they don't see." He looked up at me, eyes swollen and broken. "Please don't go. Please. I'll do anything." The words flowed freely now, unguarded, soaked in fear. "I made fun of you because you were quiet, because you didn't fight back. I thought that meant you were weak." He swallowed hard. "I was wrong." I kept my voice steady. "Stand up." He didn't move. "I'll hold your hand," he whispered. "Just don't leave me here." The tyrant who once addressed rooms now begged inches from the ground. I reached out, not to comfort, but to test. He clung to my hand like it was the last real thing in the world. "I can't survive without you," he said. "I know that now." The phone captured everything. His shaking breath, his sobs, his broken admissions. We walked again. Slow, uneven. Every step was effort for him. "I thought power meant control," he whispered. "But I don't control anything." "You never did," I answered quietly. At one point he stumbled again and collapsed against me, arms wrapped tight around my torso, crying into my shoulder. "I'm nothing out here," he whimpered. "Nothing." I stood still until his shaking eased. The forest listened. My phone listened. Eventually, distant sounds reached us, faint, rhythmic. Not rain. Engines. I stilled, raised my hand. Richard froze. Flashlights pierced the trees like stars dragged down to earth. "We're here," I called. Richard broke down completely. He dropped to his knees again, sobbing so hard he couldn't breathe. "They're here," he gasped into the darkness. "I didn't die." Rescuers emerged, muddy, serious, efficient. One knelt in front of Richard immediately. "You're safe now," the man said calmly. Richard grabbed his arm. "She saved me," he cried, pointing at me blindly. "I couldn't do anything without her." I stopped the recording and slipped my phone back into my pocket. No one noticed. They wrapped blankets around us, checked vitals, led us toward the distant lights. Richard clung to me the entire way, fingers locking into my sleeve like he feared I might vanish the moment someone else took over. As we emerged from the trees into open space, rain finally easing, I looked back once, at the dark line of forest that had stripped everything false from him. Richard noticed and whispered, "Don't leave." I looked forward, into the lights, into the waiting world. "I'm right here," I said. And for the first time, it was true on my terms. The lights blinded him first. Richard squinted as if they were accusations instead of help, his face still contorted with fear, streaked in mud and tears. The rescuers moved efficiently, practiced in crisis, their calm almost surgical compared to the chaos he'd been living in for hours. Blankets wrapped around our shoulders, hands checked pulses, voices asked the same questions twice. "Names? Any injuries? How long have you been stranded?" Richard didn't answer right away. He clung to me while they spoke, his fingers tight enough to hurt. His body still shook, though the storm had weakened to a mist that made everything feel unreal, like a bad dream slowing toward its end. Then he straightened. Slowly, deliberately, like a mask rising into place. "I'm Richard Hale," he said hoarsely, "Director of Operations at—" I felt the shift instantly. The rescuers exchanged quick glances. Authority still worked, even out here. Titles traveled well. He loosened his grip on me and wiped his face with the edge of the blanket. His voice lowered, steadier now. My employee panicked. I had to keep her calm. I turned my head toward him. He didn't look at me. "We got caught in the storm," he continued. "I assessed the situation, got us to higher ground, stayed focused." The words slid into their old groove too easily. A rescuer nodded. "Tough conditions out there." "Tell me about it," Richard said with a weak chuckle. "Scariest day of her life." Her, not ours. Someone led him toward an ambulance. He walked a little taller with each step, relief hardening into confidence. When he glanced back at me, his eyes asked a question neither of us voiced. "We're back now, right?" I said nothing. In the ambulance, he took control of the conversation, describing events, reframing moments, minimizing his breakdown with professional language. Stress response, temporary shock. Anyone would react. The more he talked, the more the past hours shrank, until they were just an inconvenience. At the hospital, reporters waited behind taped lines. A rescue in a remote area always attracted interest. A man in a suit jacket borrowed from a paramedic made for a good story. Richard leaned close to me as we exited. His voice dropped. "We don't need to make this into a thing." I met his gaze. "What thing?" "You know, drama." His smile was practiced again. "We keep this professional." I nodded once. He relaxed immediately. By morning, we were driven back to the city in silence. He answered emails on his phone, already reorganizing reality pixel by pixel. "You okay?" he asked suddenly, polite, distant. "Yes," I said. At the office, sympathy washed over him like champagne. Handshakes, claps on the back. "Hero. Lucky to have you." He accepted it graciously, eyes shining. On Monday, he returned fully. The jokes, too. In the open plan office, he leaned against my desk and laughed lightly. "Guess we both learned something about roughing it, huh?" A few people smiled. He inhaled theatrically. "For the record," he added, "nature smells worse than you ever did." Laughter followed. He believed the balance was restored. He was wrong. The office sounded the same as it always had. Keyboards tapping, phones vibrating softly, the low murmur of conversations carefully kept just under audible. Normalcy had returned so completely that it felt violent, as if the forest, the storm, the fear had all been erased instead of survived. Richard thrived in that illusion. He stood near the center aisle, coffee in hand, surrounded by a loose semicircle of coworkers. He was telling the story again, polished now, compressed into something entertaining. Honestly, he said with a laugh, you never know how people will react under pressure. A few knowing smiles. Some panic, he continued, shrugging. Others step up. His eyes flicked toward me, just long enough to be calculated. The message landed where he wanted it to. I sat at my desk, hands folded, listening, the same way I always had. And of course, he went on, nature has a sense of humor. Makes you appreciate air conditioning. Light laughter rippled through the group. This one, he added, nodding toward me, was convinced we were going to die. Stronger laughter now. Safer laughter. I stood. The sound cut through the room like a dropped plate. People turned. Richard's smile hesitated just for a fraction of a second. Yes, Emily? He asked, warm, managerial. You're right, I said calmly. It was educational. His shoulders relaxed. Exactly. I learned how people behave, I continued, when no one is watching. A few smiles faded. Richard laughed reflexively. Well, trauma bonding and all that? I learned, I said, raising my phone. Who actually survives things? The room stilled. He frowned slightly. What's that? A recording. Silence thickened. Someone near the back shifted uncomfortably. You secretly recorded me? Richard said, incredulity edging his voice. That's highly unprofessional. I didn't answer. I pressed play. The first sound filled the office speakers. His breathing. Fast. Ragged. Broken. Then his voice. Please don't leave me. I can't survive without you. I'm nothing out here. The room froze. Color drained from faces. Someone's mouth fell open. A chair creaked as someone sat down slowly. Richard lunged forward. Turn it off! The speaker kept going. I made fun of you because I thought you were weak. I don't control anything. Please help me. His sobs echoed off white walls and glass partitions. Raw, animal, undeniable. Employees stared at him, no longer seeing the confident director, the untouchable man. They saw what the forest had seen. Enough! He shouted, voice cracking. This is out of context. I let it play a few seconds longer. Then I stopped it. The silence afterward was absolute. No one laughed. Richard stood there trembling, exposed in a way no joke could shield. His authority hovered for a moment, searching for something to land on, and found nothing. I looked around the room, faces full of shock, of understanding, of something dangerously close to relief. I never smelled, I said quietly, but lies do. Richard opened his mouth. Nothing came out. HR didn't wait long. Neither did management. By noon, his office was empty. By evening, his email access was gone. I returned to my desk and finished my work. Same tasks, same screens, but the air felt different now. Lighter, clearer. As I packed up to leave, someone I barely knew touched my arm gently. That was brave, she said. I shook my head. It was necessary. Outside, the city hummed. Life moved forward, indifferent and vast. For the first time, I moved with it. Not quieter than before, not louder. Just visible. Richard lost his laughter that day. I kept my voice. And that was the last joke he ever told at my expense.